Welcome back to the show, Senator.
Great.
Good to have you again.
Great to be here.
So, okay, I saw another study showing that Montana has the fourth slowest internet speeds in the nation. Is there a role for government to help fix that so we can be competitive in the global economy?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because one of our first bills is going to be the Rural Communications Act. In my experience, I've traveled, of course, across Montana, every county, and I spend a lot of time on the bus. And the cell phone coverage in Iraq is better than the cell phone coverage in Montana.
Really?
And it does affect business. When you're doing service calls out there and you can't get communications back, what if you don't have the tech manual? What happens? How do you communicate back? It affects public safety. Montana has one of the lowest survivability rates of rural accidents. Why? Because if you get an accident in 2DOT or win it, only by God's grace will you have someone come by. So it does affect not only business, but it affects safety. And what about education? When you look at the internet, some of these smaller communities, they may not have a Latin teacher, but certainly they have the ability to have a virtual platform where you have a Latin teacher, it's virtual. And that requires high-speed internet. It requires to be on par with the rest of the world as far as our communication ability.
Is this government grants that would come in and basically encourage producers to come in and put more Wi-Fi capabilities? Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Well, it's a variety of things. I think there needs to be an incentive for the telephone companies not to have dead calls. Okay. If you look at if you're a Antler chandelier business in Dillon, about a third of the calls come in are dead. That means that he picks up the phone, the customer on the other end doesn't receive a connection. It's either busy or no one's, or the number's been changed. That's a third of the calls. And this is one place where the government can step in and make sure the regulatory environment, particularly in rural Montana, is that if you're going to assume a contract, then you should fulfill the contract and have a degree of certainty that that last landline is connected. Looking at incentives, how do we build out a infrastructure system that's appropriate? Because in many cases, Montana's not competing with Idaho or Wyoming. As you say, we're competing against the globe. Right. And when you compete against the globe, the infrastructure needs to be appropriate to compete. And that is, in some cases, grants are appropriate, some cases, tax incentives to make sure that the phone companies and cable companies and internet companies can build the tower and receive a reasonable return on investment, and then form a regulatory environment that ensures if a company assumes a contract, that contract will be fulfilled to a standard.
So real quick, we have about 40 seconds left. The president recently authorized airstrikes in Iraq. War Powers Resolution allows Congress to basically come in and keep the president on a tight leash. Do you think the War Powers Act is constitutional?
I do. I think the Congress still remains the people's body. And I think the Congress can and should make sure that we hold the executive accountable to his actions. I think the airstrikes in Iraq are overdue. ISIS is a threat. I think we have to look at the Mosul Dam and look at key areas in Iraq that we need under control of a force other than ISIS.
Right. And
then certainly, Israel is at greater risk. Iran is emboldened, and ISIS is about 10,000, forces. I think we should help the Kurds, our friends to the north, help themselves on it, and identify key points in Iraq that need to be under allied or at least civil control.
So if you go to Congress, you're going to be there sitting there watching the president, making sure they're using that authority appropriately, and if not, you'll step in and try to build something.
Absolutely. I think the Congress does have a role to make sure the rules of engagement are appropriate, make sure when we put our troops into harm's way that they have the ability and the resources to fight and win decisively in the battlefield. And I think Congress has an enormous role in that.
Well, thanks for coming by. Maybe we can get some fishing in before the summer's over.
I would love to, but I'm thinking I'm going to be a campaign trail, and probably not going to put my fly in the water too much, but I'd like to.
All right. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good one.